Welcome back to the program, everyone. Let's switch gears now and turn our attention to the war in Gaza, where it appears the ceasefire U.S. President Joe Biden was hopeful would happen on Monday next week may be a long way away. Hamas head of political and international relations, Bassem Naim, says there is still so much to discuss and leaders have not scratched the surface. He told Al Jazeera the gap is still wide. We have to discuss a lot of points with the mediators, adding that the optimistic posture of the Biden administration is not related to the reality on the ground and has more to do with domestic political consideration in an election year. He said, quote, if the Americans want to be really optimistic, they have to end their game of double standards. Hamas' non-negotiable demands are a final and total ceasefire and not just a humanitarian pause, the total withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza and the freedom of movement for Palestinians within Gaza. In the meantime, Israeli tanks are said to have hit the eastern parts of Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. Israeli forces have also demolished Palestinian-owned shacks in the village of Jalbun, northeast of Jenin in the occupied West Bank, prompting confrontations that ended with arrest. Israeli military spokesperson Daniel Hagari told the World Zionist Organization Emergency Conference that Israel is fighting against Hamas and not against the people of Gaza, despite Israeli attacks on the besieged enclave, killing almost 30,000 people. As the war rages, a group of 55 international journalists has written an open letter urging the Israeli government to let them enter Gaza to report on the war. And Director of Coordination, United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, Ramesh Rajasimhan, says well over 500,000 Gazans are just a step from famine. He was briefing the Security Council on Tuesday on food security in the Gaza enclave. Now, according to the Rajasimhan, food experts, a warning of complete agricultural collapse in northern Gaza by the end of this month if conditions persist.
In December, it was projected that the entire population of 2.2 million people in Gaza would face high levels of acute food insecurity by February 2024. The highest share of people facing this level of food insecurity ever recorded worldwide. And here we are at the end of February with at least 576,000 people in Gaza, 1/4 of the population, one step away from famine. Unfortunately, as grim as the picture we see today, there is every possibility for further deterioration. Military operations, insecurity, and extensive restrictions on the entry and delivery of essential goods have decimated food production and agriculture.
The cessation of hostilities and restoration of a humanitarian space to deliver assistance and restore service are essential first steps in eliminating a risk of famine. A critical priority is to restore safe humanitarian access throughout the Gaza Strip and to all those in need of life-saving assistance. Border crossings should be reopened, including the commercial traffic. Essential commodities must be allowed to move into and throughout Gaza.
The breakdown in civil order, driven by sheer desperation, is preventing the safe distribution of aid. We are now urgently exploring all viable delivery options to allow the resumption of operations in northern Gaza as soon as possible. This is an absolute humanitarian imperative. The staff on our convoys witnessed catastrophic conditions in the north. Food and clean water are scarce, malnutrition is soaring, and disease is rife.
That this catastrophic famine and genocide has been allowed to happen at all and allowed to continue for this long brings shame on all of us, not least this Security Council that continues to fail to demand a ceasefire and ensure respect for international law and for its own resolutions, leaving the Palestinian people to the mercy of the occupying power that has zero regard for its IHL obligations to ensure the safety and well-being of the civilian population under its control, choosing instead to terrorize, kill, maim, displace, and starve them.
How can it be that Israel is libelously held responsible for a situation that is clearly the UN's fault? The conduct of the UN in the field must be streamlined and humanitarian aid must be distributed more effectively. This is the solution. Israel is committed to improving the humanitarian situation in the northern part of Gaza as well. Accordingly, yesterday Israel permitted and facilitated the airdrops of 64 Jordanian and French food packages throughout northern Gaza. The UN, on the other hand, has refused to deliver aid to this area. UN agencies' decision to suspend the distribution of aid to northern Gaza is not only counterproductive, but harmful to the Palestinian civilian population, and it's also used as yet another way to demonize Israel.
Well, let's dissect all of these latest developments in Gaza. The Voice of America's Linda Greinstein is in Jerusalem for us. Linda, great to see you. So much to talk about, but just how consistent has the IDF been about briefing on its offensive in Gaza very recently?
You know, for the first few months of the war, the Army spokesman would go on national television every night and give a briefing that was anywhere from 5 minutes to 20 minutes. On all of the local television stations, he was a fixture. And now it happens less, and I think there's two reasons. One is, the war has now been going on for almost 5 months. So there's a little bit of kind of war fatigue. The other reason is that at the beginning of the war, Israel called up 360,000 reserve soldiers, and many of them were fighting in Gaza. Since then, most of them have been released, at least temporarily. So it's kind of the numbers of soldiers fighting has also gone down. So because of that, the amount of briefing has gone down significantly, although there's still heavy fighting in various parts of Gaza.
Yes, Linda, so we understand that there has been Israeli shelling in the eastern part of Deir el-Balah in central Gaza in the last few hours. What else are you hearing?
Well, I don't think we have yet any casualty numbers from that shelling. Israel says that it does shelling when it identifies Hamas gunmen who are about to fire on Israeli soldiers or, places where weapons are being made. But the fact that the fighting is still going on in Deir el-Balah in the center of Gaza, which were areas where the north and the center, the fighting was supposed to have finished already. And now the fighting, Israel has said that it intends to launch an assault on Rafah, where more than half of Gaza's population is now sheltering after they've moved several times from the north. It means that Israel has not yet achieved its military goals. Israel says it has killed 12,000 Hamas fighters out of anywhere between 25 and 30,000. Hamas says that the number is closer to 6,000. In addition, the Hamas death toll, is expected to cross, or the death toll of Palestinians in Gaza, as reported by the Hamas-affiliated health ministry, is expected to cross 30,000 today or tomorrow.
And we are also learning that the last functional hospital in northern Gaza, the Al-Ada hospital, has been shut down. It's shut down operations due to severe shortages of fuel and medical supplies. There have also been stories about IDF forces forcing medical staff to strip to their underwear out in the cold before being allowed to get back in. So I wonder, perhaps you are in Jerusalem. Do stories like these filter back to Israel? What's the reaction?
Well, I mean, first of all, the Al-Ada hospital did shut down because of lack of fuel, and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, as you reported before I came on, is growing worse and worse. In terms of the having them stripped to their underwear, that's because Israel says that terrorists have been hiding among medical personnel. And so they wanted to make sure that before they let them back into the hospital, that there were no gunmen or people carrying bombs on their bodies. That story did not make it back to Israel. In general, and especially lately, the Israeli media is really not reporting on the Palestinian humanitarian situation and on the casualties. Most Israelis are still supportive of this war. They say that on October 6th, before Hamas, thousands of Hamas gunmen came into Israel and, massacred 1,200 people, including mostly civilians, and kidnapped some 250 people, that there was no fighting and that Hamas started this war. So no, that did not make it back to Israel. But again, Israelis remain supportive of this war. They feel that it's a just war. They feel that the Israelis who've been evacuated from their homes, there are about close to 200,000 have left both the border with Gaza and the border with Lebanon. And they say that they can't go back until they feel safe. And right now they still don't feel safe.
Mm. Well, Linda, the situation is dire in Gaza. The United Nations is more concerned about the protection of civilians. The humanitarian corridor in Gaza, coordinator in Gaza rather, says that people could run out of food and supplies by May if conditions do not change. There are also reports of the Israeli Defense Forces halting aid trucks and preventing them from reaching areas where they are desperately needed. Does the IDF deny or confirm any of such stories?
So they say that they are committed to allowing aid into Gaza. And as you reported earlier, Jordan dropped a lot of aid into northern Gaza. But they also said that they will not allow aid trucks if they're afraid that those aid trucks could get attacked. And there have been cases of Hamas stealing a lot of the humanitarian aid that is meant for the Palestinian civilian population and not for Hamas. So the situation is definitely desperate. Israel says the UN has to do better about making sure that that aid will not get to Hamas and to strengthen Hamas. In addition, there are these ongoing ceasefire talks, as you reported. They're not as close, perhaps, as President Joe Biden would like to see, although there is kind of a deadline, which is that Ramadan begins, the Muslim holy month begins on March 10th. And I think both Israel and Hamas would like to see at least a temporary ceasefire in place. Now, during that temporary ceasefire, which according to press reports will be for about 6 weeks in exchange for the freedom of 40 Israeli hostages and 400 Palestinian prisoners being released, during that ceasefire, large amounts of international aid will be able to get into Gaza, and that might relieve the situation somewhat if a deal actually is put in place for a ceasefire.
And just before I let you go, Linda, walk us through the recovery process in Israel. October 7th is a very significant date. It's a day that many Israelis may not forget in a hurry. I wonder perhaps what exactly the recovery process is at the moment, and just how the general well-being of the people since the attack.
Well, first of all, every Israeli is traumatized. Israel is a small country. There are 9 million citizens, so everybody knows somebody who was either killed or in October 7th, taken hostage, or has been killed in the fighting since. I personally know one of the hostages, a friend of mine's son, 23 years old. His arm was blown off on October 7th, and since then they haven't received any kind of proof of life other than seeing him walking into Gaza, being put on a truck and being taken into Gaza. I can't imagine what it's like for them wanting to get their son back. So I think the entire country is traumatized. People felt that the Israeli government and the army wasn't able to protect them. Hamas took over 20 communities. I mean, completely took over. And, you know, there are text messages from people who were hiding in their safe rooms saying, where's the army? What's going on? And so I think depending, you know, everybody's traumatized. Obviously, people who have lost a family member or who have been forced to leave their homes are traumatized even more. So I think it's difficult. Some people are starting to return to areas near Gaza that they left. I actually have a friend from the town of Sderot where there was also heavy fighting. He and his wife left. They were in a hotel. He was in reserve. He served in the reserve duty. And a few weeks ago, they just decided to go back. The north on the Lebanon border is still really not safe, and people haven't gone back. So I think everybody's life has been upended. And of course, for the, you know, families of the hostages or the families of the victims, their life will never be the same.
Well, we'll keep our eyes and ears on the ground and see how negotiations play out in Qatar. We understand the Hamas just not perhaps ready yet for that deal. But Linda, we must thank you indeed for agreeing to speak with us here. View is correspondent live for us in Jerusalem.